Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the halls of history! We have been expecting you.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Halls of History podcast. I am Colin Sorensen. This is my partner.
I'm Zachary Martin.
This will be part one of a part two series of the Greek, and today we'll be going over Greek way of life.
Indeed. So this is going to be roughly 15 minutes.
Maybe 15 minutes, maybe longer.
Yep. So let's dive right into it. So Greek's origins are very shrouded in mystery. Little known is about where they came from, but the first few artifacts started to date back around 1600 BC. They were extraordinarily advanced for their time, and they made many technological, military, government, and architectural advances. So let's dive right into it.
Yep.
So let's start with medicine. So they made huge advancements. Huge advancements in what we know in today's medicine. So they use many natural ingredients to craft herbal medicines and remedies. One of the major medicines that they used was they would take 2 pieces of willow bark. Why is that important? Well, it's because it's actually extremely similar to modern aspirin. It's 2 pieces of willow bark. I think they would make it into a stew. Like, they would infuse it into, like, a tea. And then it's essentially today's aspirin, which is insane.
Yeah.
How our aspirin today has tons of ingredients, and yet they just took willow bark, and all of a sudden they have this remedy.
And that's what happened, is we take stuff from our past, and we kind of advance them. Some of them are advanced, some of them downgraded. But that everything that we have from all these that we were talking about.
Yeah, everything comes from something, and a lot of these things date back to ancient history.
Yeah.
Like, pretty much anything you can imagine has a early predecessor. And, yeah, so they may not have they didn't make pills or, like, syringes or any of that, but they still had ways to cure ailments. So they had, So another common way was if you had a headache, they would give you peppermint tea to drink, and their ideology was to intertwine the spiritual and physical elements of healing into one form. So the herbal tea is about as close as we're gonna get to some of their medicines. Like, they did have physical remedies, but a lot of them was like healing not just your physical health, but also your soul and your body and your spirit.
That's in most of these empires are most of them are religion based. Most of them have religions. They follow with religion. Most of them will do that, and just like that, like soul cleansing and stuff. Like, people still do that to like spiritual cleansing, and there's still religions inside of today's world.
So the Greeks also developed multiple different kinds of surgeries, which is insane. They began using lung draining. So if you had fluid building up in your lungs, they would actually drain it, which is impressive. They started amputating limbs, and they used bloodletting, which a lot of empires did. But I mean, it's still impressive how amputation, something that could go so terribly wrong, was developed so far back.
Yes, and that's true how advanced these civilizations were. Like the Egyptians, how they built the pyramids, and that must have taken a while. Like, today's world, we would have no idea how to build pyramids. We have machines that would help us, but they built that, no machines, nothing.
So this is going to be a hot take. You can cut this out if you want. I think the majority of the reason that they have all these great wonders, I know this is going to sound horrible, slave labor.
Yeah.
Like, today, we don't have enough people willing and dedicated to build these great structures of strength and power and wealth. We just don't have enough people dedicated to it.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I don't want anybody in the world to be enslaved. That's not what I'm saying. Don't take this out of context. But, like, the pyramids, the Parthenon, every great structure,
was
medieval structure,
made with labor.
yes, made with slave labor.
And that's just part of history. There was slaves back in time, like, I think 95% of every empire had slavery and
yeah.
slave labor. And most of them had social classes, too, and at the bottom was slaves.
And it's not like they valued other people less. It's just their culture.
Yes.
Because once one civilization did it, so now when that another civilization is built off of it, they keep slavery. So there's always going to be remnants. And that's something you'll find. Like the Vikings did it, the Greeks did it, the Romans did it. And majority of them weren't race based like America's slave trade. They were prisoners of war, and then just criminals, prisoners of war. So yeah. Okay, so back to
Greek.
yeah, that was a bit of a tangent. So they also began splinting broken bones, which is pretty helpful, I would say so. Okay, now let's get into something you all were expecting. The military. So the Greeks were excellent warriors. They were professional warriors, often equipped with spears, short swords, breastplates, vambraces, shin guards, and helmets. However, it's hard to clarify Greek armies as just one. You can't group them all, because every Greek city-state had their own army, and very rarely did they come together and work together as one. We'll get into that later. So every city was essentially an empire, and every city has their own focus. So, like, Athens was focused on philosophy and art rather than military, while Sparta was the polar opposite. Their culture was violence. Their culture was military domination.
Yes.
So we'll be going into Sparta's military, because I feel like if you're going to cover something, you got to go to the best example of it. And Sparta is just that.
Spartans were the peak of their time in their military. They were
They were the pinnacle, and there's several reasons I will get into on why.
They were the best quality of soldiers. They necessarily didn't have all the plated armor, but they know how to fight. They knew how to use their weapons effectively. They knew how to make different machines and things to help them in battle.
So we'll get into all those things. So the training for men began at the age of 7.
Which is very young.
So this training was always happening. It was meticulous. It was constant. They were trained in any form you could think about of combat. They would practice boxing, wrestling, javelin, discus, everything to enhance their body, their focus, their coordination, everything. They would do so much. And on top of this, they were taught to use every weapon you could think of. Bow and arrow, javelin, sword, spear, shield, everything.
And that was a key part, because if you lose your weapon and you can't find the same weapon, you know how to use the other one.
Yeah, like if you use a sword, which is one of the most basic weapons that requires no training. Well, then once you lose that sword and you pick up a weapon that requires more finesse, like I know they're not gonna find rapiers, but they require, like, let's say you find a rapier. You're not going to know how to use it properly, because that weapon requires so much finesse. And
it's also a one-handed weapon. Like, some swords are two-handed.
Majority of the swords that they were using were short swords.
Yeah, they were short swords. They were one-handed. But just like that, like, if you don't know how to use their weapons properly. And even if you lose your weapon, they knew how to box, wrestle. So even if they lost their weapon, they were completely defenseless.
Yeah,
they could still fend for themselves.
Hand-to-hand combat was a huge thing for them. Whether that's with a weapon or without a weapon, they were ready. And so they would also harden themselves to all kinds of elements. They were constantly sparring, and if it was snowing out, they didn't care. They would go out. They would suit themselves to the elements. Because if you're out in the middle of nowhere preparing for an assault, and it starts snowing, and there's nowhere to go and get away from the snow, it's going to drag your morale down unless you're prepared for it and you've been in it before and you're prepared for it.
And especially Spartans, they don't wear that much armor, and they don't really have much warmth with them, even if it's snowing. Like, they didn't really wear that much.
Well, every Spartan had a slave, or, like, not necessarily slave, but a person to carry their tents and their armor and everything.
It's basically like a squire.
Yeah, essentially. So, Now let's get into some of their tactics. So one of the main tactics used that you'll see in a lot of modern media is the phalanx.
Yes.
So the phalanx was essentially similar to a shield wall, but they had spears that would go 7 to 9 feet long, and they would just set them up, and it's hard to get close into CQC when there's a spear at your forehead and hundreds of other spears ready to go down and impale you at every step
Basically,
possible.
what they did is they put a shield wall, and then they put spears sticking through the shields. So you're protected, but there's also spears there to damage
No,
them.
it's more so of a...
Defensive and offensive line.
They would use their shields, but it wasn't necessarily a wall. They would have the people in the front using the spears. But then all the other spears would be tilted up in case one of their brother in front of them fell. Then they would just go up and replace their fallen brother.
Which would basically, it would, if you're the enemy's POV point of view, and you saw one go down and then another taking its place, it would technically be a wall. Because if you're trying to get through, it's just a wall of spikes.
Here's the one thing, though. This was not developed into a lot later in the years. A majority of the time, it's exactly what you would expect. A blob of battle-hungry warriors expecting a good death, going out there, swords ready to cut you in half for honor and victory. So, yeah, that's essentially their tactics. I know in modern times, there's so many different tactics and everything.
Yes.
But in medieval times, tactics, you gotta be able to, once those tactics fall apart, still be able to fight effectively.
Yes, that's true that should be true with most militaries, because if your tactic doesn't work, then you should have another plan to work with it.
A backup plan.
A backup plan.
But here's the thing. When you don't have a primary plan, and your plan is just go out there and kick some butt, that's a pretty good plan.
Yeah, if you just want to... That was some people's ideas, too, is that they would go run out there and try and cause as much damage as possible without even thinking about it. That's their plan. This is just no plan.
And here's the thing. It's not just like they're average dudes either. So the women of Sparta, they would also rigorous activity. Not to the extent of the men, but they would wrestle and they would do discus and all of that stuff. All of this just so they could bear bigger and stronger children, because that's what they valued. So they would work out, and it actually worked, because Spartans were about, I think, couple inches stronger. They're a couple inches taller, and they're also bigger and stronger and broader.
It's the genetics is what they're thinking of, is if you have good genetics and you pass them on.
They tried to perfect their genetics, which is, it worked out in their favor, because if you know anything about Greek warfare, you know the Spartans were the warriors of their time.
Yes, they were the peak. They were the top of the food chain, essentially.
So now let's get into something other than violence. We'll circle back to that, though.
Yes, we will.
Don't get too sad. So the government. Now we're moving into Athens, which, So Athens created the democracy, which with tons of countries in the world use.
Yes.
It's basically, essentially, a government run by the people. Male adults would go to council meetings and discuss together rather than having one king or just one leader do it for them. How was it formed? Well, the Athenian democracy began to develop when their king fled under Spartan attack. So they thought, well, if kings are just going to be cowards and don't know what they're doing, why not have it run by everyone who has a different perspective, a different idea? Because not everybody's going to think the same, and sometimes it's for the better. Like, if there's a problem, who's going to solve it better? A group of people all with different ideas, or one person with one idea who might not even know what they're doing?
And that's the part with the kings and stuff and the council.
That's why it fell apart.
It's also separating the powers, too. Because if you had one person ruling Sparta, then you would have your armies everywhere, and they would also get crumbled because, and the king would also make decisions. But if you have a council of them, they're all making decisions, and multiple ideas is what's helping them push through the battle.
So this is a council of a lot of people. It's not just... it's not just like 30, it's essentially
The
a
entire.
quarter to a half of the village.
Yes.
So that's a lot of people all contributing their ideas. So there's two branches of democracy that developed from this one. So there is the direct democracy, which is what Athens had, where it's everyone going there and contributing their ideas themselves. But if you look at America, we elect people to go
Yes.
there and do it for us.
And we have representatives we have a president, but
Yeah.
that's why we also have different branches in the U.S. military too.
It's basically the cabinet. It's the
Yes.
electoral college essentially. All those people contributing to the voting process.
Yeah, they're all contributing, and just like an American, like it's your responsibility to vote, but you're contributing, but you're not actually there. You're
yeah.
getting somebody to do it for you.
Yeah, which isn't necessarily lazy, but
It's if we had every single person trying to do their own thing and run the government, it would probably crumble to the ground.
and keep in mind there's a lot less people in Athens than there is in America.
Oh yes.
There's 360 million people in America. About don't get mad if I get that number completely off,
We-
but somewhere around that number, which is a lot of people.
That is a
So
lot.
imagine 360 million people in a room. That's not going to work out too well.
Yeah.
But now imagine maybe 358, I think the number is,
Yeah.
of people. Now that they're discussing, it's still a lot of people, but
Yeah.
it's better than 300 million.
And yeah, so even if you're gathering, they're all minds. It's basically like scientists, basically. They're working together to do that.
Yep. So they're all contributing their ideas.
Yes.
But despite this advancement, there were still many many city-states that had different kinds of governing systems. Sparta had an oligarchy, and one of these best examples of the oligarchy is King Leonidas. So in oligarchy, let's explain this before. It's basically not quite as big as a democracy, but there's more than just one. I think Sparta had 2 kings, but it can range from 2 to 5, I think, about is what classifies as an oligarchy. So, yeah, one of the best known kings is King Leonidas, who led the Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae, and we'll get into that in a second. But he was ruling alongside King Leotychides. I don't butcher me in the comments, but so now let's get into architecture. Alrighty, now we're on to architecture, which Greece is known for a little bit.
Yes.
Is their architecture. Well, now we're on to architecture. The Greeks made several advancements in architecture. They employed a lot of strategies for constructing statues, houses, temples, and buildings that are still used today.
Yes.
So let's just start with basic houses. They used wood and stone with mortar to build strong yet beautiful buildings that some are still standing today.
Yes.
And that's really impressive considering how long houses last nowadays when you
Yeah.
stop taking care of
You
them.
don't take care of them good enough, 15, 20 years maybe,
Yeah.
give or take.
And yet these are lasting for thousands of years,
Thousands of years.
which is insane. And something possibly even more impressive is their theaters. So their theaters were designed for a person to be able to stand on a stage, speak, and have everyone hear them. Which sounds impressive, but until you keep in mind that these stadiums can hold up to 14,000 people.
I mean, considering nowadays the stadiums that we have today, I mean, they're not.
But here's the thing, there's no
speakers.
They're just, this person standing in the middle would be able to talk.
And the person on the way
Yeah.
top would be able to hear them.
Yeah, the person in the farthest row would be able to hear them with absolute clarity.
Yes.
Perfect clarity. They had stone seats that were slowly staggered upwards on a hill, which would help because it would echo through.
Yes.
And now I want to get into some of their statues which are so beautiful. I know you've seen pictures of them, but
Realistic.
think about it. They will take a solid block of marble, a huge block of marble, a hammer and a chisel, and over the course of 2 to 3 years,
That's a long time.
they would chip away a bit by bit until it was finished, and then they would polish it, and then they would put it where it was, and they are so beautiful. I've
Yes.
never seen one in person, but they are
And there's
just
some
look.
museums.
They're
around.
never as beautiful in the pictures.
Until you
it-
get up close, and then
Yeah.
then you actually can see.
Yeah, there's
what
so much
actually-
detail that they put into it. Like, so much detail and meticulous time spent chipping away every detail. And it's crazy to think, like, if you look at one of the first statues ever made to one of the last statues made by a Greek sculptor, the difference is night and day.
Yes.
Okay, now let's get to the Parthenon. So this building, I think you've seen a picture of it probably because it's pretty popular.
Yes.
They would, like I said, chip away at huge blocks of marble, stack them on top of each other, pillars, huge pillars. This building was 45 feet tall.
45 feet tall. That is very tall.
Yeah, yeah. But here's the thing. The most amazing part is the ability to get those chunks of marble, which I'm going to estimate about, I'm going to lowball it, a ton of weight. A literal ton.
That's 2,000 pounds.
Yeah, one person. The most a person's ever lifted is half a ton.
Yeah.
So in order to get that, not just up
Yeah.
a couple feet, 45 feet
Yeah.
to keep building it is insane. So they will stack them on top of each other. And the roof, meticulously crafted, everything. So
Yeah.
much detail, statues, architecture, little details that you would never even notice if you were there.
Yes.
All of this in 10 years.
And it normally takes something like that. Well, nowadays it might take, because there's multiple people working on it, but nowadays if you look at it, skyscrapers, those they can vary depending on how tall they are.
I'm gonna go out on a limb though and say that the Parthenon is worlds more impressive
Yes.
than anything we have ever built.
Oh, yes.
Just considering how primitive their tools were compared to ours, and how beautiful and how resilient. Like, do you think, I'm going to ask you this, do you think any one of the skyscrapers in New York will last 1,000 years?
Probably not. And it's also not made, they're made out of metal.
Mhm.
They also
They're-
but
It's gonna decay. It's going
Yes.
to break down, decay, and collapse eventually.
But then you look over at them, those have still lasted a while.
Yeah, the Parthenon is still standing
Yes.
after 2,000 years,
Yes.
which is longer than any building. I'm gonna say it's going to last longer than any building we will ever build.
Probably.
So that's really impressive. Now, the final show, the Battle of Thermopylae. This is one of the most famous Greek battles ever. When Leonidas and his 300 Spartans fought hundreds of thousands of Persians. Well, there are many misconceptions about this battle that are spread by modern media, so I'm going to break it down for you. So the war between Greece and Persia was in full force in the middle. And the Persians, they were crushing the Greeks. They were getting pushed back. And they're on this isle, pretty much. They're on a peninsula, essentially, a little bit east of Italy. And the Persians were just driving them, and there's nothing they can do. So now, there's a land bridge. I don't know how wide exactly it is, but it's pretty decently sized. It's not as big. It's not that big, but it's decently sized.
Decent.
In Persia, this is the part. They needed to hold this for a little bit of time so that all the other people, all the other city-states could get together and created a defense because they were driving. If Persia got through there quickly enough, everything would fall.
Yes.
So they knew this. They knew that they had to hold it for a couple days. So the Greeks, this peninsula that they were protecting had every powerhouse, every Greek powerhouse you could pretty much think of. Sparta, Athens, and so many more were all there. This strip was Thermopylae. It was surrounded by water and was, like I said, vital to Greek survival. So, where modern media gets it wrong, though, is that unlike a lot of movies, there wasn't just 300 Spartans there. There was 7,000 Greek warriors.
And that's a lot of people.
That is a lot. And yeah, so it sounds like a lot of people until you realize that even historians have said that there is between 120 to 300,000 Persian warriors.
A lot of people.
Yeah, that is insane amounts. And their goal, they knew they weren't going to win. So their goal was just to hold them there for the rest of Greece to regroup, get an army together, so they can at least have a fighting chance. Another number. There was approximately 240 Greek battle barges, ships, boats. Huge boats.
Yes.
The Persians had 600.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So it was obvious that they had no chance of winning. But guess what? They held the Persians for 3 days. Despite the fact that the battle wasn't constant, that is still insanely impressive. Think about it. On and off, you're battling for 3 days. People are dying around you. Corpses riddling the ground.
And this is what the Spartans were truly known for, is this battle.
Heroism. Their heroism.
Yes.
They knew they were going to die, but yet they gave it everything they had to make sure their loved ones back home would be able to live.
Yes.
In the end, all 7,000 died, but they took 20,000 Persians with them.
I mean, there's 20,000 to a 7,000 ratio.
That's
pretty good.
So that means every person who died took 3 Persians with them.
Yeah.
That's really good. And the Persians continued. They won. They continued into Athens, captured it, and they were rolling the Greeks again until the Battle of Salamis, where the Greeks gave all they could and won the Greco-Persian War. However, the Persians would make another attempt the next year, but were stopped again at the Battle of Plataea. So, this is not much of what they did. Like, this is only a fraction. Like, we didn't even go over, like, their philosophers. So they had so much going on. But if we were to go into all of it, this would have been an hour-long podcast.
Just for even the way of life. And next part, it'll be the mythology. That's probably what Greek is a little more popular about, because they had
there's a lot of
gods that you think of, like Zeus.
Like, when you think of gods, I bet a couple of the ones that pop into your head are probably Greek.
Yeah, if somebody told me about, if somebody said I'm thinking about a god, I'd probably say Zeus or Poseidon first.
Yeah. You know what? But we'll get into all that next episode. Thank you for joining us on this
31-minute podcast.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the length.
Yes.
But I feel like this needed to be. This
needed to be a good podcast, very popular. Thank you for watching. If you've not seen our Norse series of the two, and then the Akkadians.
The Akkadian Empire.
Akkadian. There's 2 ways to say it. We say it.
Potato.
Yeah, potato.
Anyways, thank you for joining us. Have a great day. And make sure, if you enjoyed this content, like and subscribe. And leave a comment on if you prefer one empire that you want us to cover, drop a comment because that would mean a lot to us.
This was part 1 of the part 2 series of the Greek. This was the Greek way of life.